Martin Luther King said it best. He said, there comes a point when silence becomes betrayal. We all have control over this. We do. We can participate in this government. We can urge our children to vote. We can take them to the polls with us and say, watch mommy vote. You know, I mean, or take them to when you're working on campaigns. You ain't got to work on my campaign. You can work against me. That's fine. But I just want to see you working in this democracy. This is our democracy. This is ours. And I'm telling you, every day when I ride down East Capitol Street, every time I pinch myself. I do.
Hello, my name is Maya Rocky Moore Cummings, and I would like to welcome you to the first ever Elijah E. Cummings Democracy and Freedom Festival. The voice you just heard was the late Congressman Cummings, and today is his birthday. Just like we're celebrating Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, we're celebrating Elijah Cummings' birthday. These were two titans of our democracy who both basically grew up in the Jim Crow South as outsiders, being treated as certainly less than full citizens in our nation's history. But both used the tools of our democracy, the tools of protest, the tools of advocacy and speech to speak out, to challenge the system to be better than it was before. And in the case of Elijah Cummings and people like John Lewis, they were able to challenge the system and change it for the better in a way that transformed lives across the country. And in doing so, they became a part of the system and rose to become some of the most powerful legislators in the land. That is the power of democracy. That is the power of people-fueled governance. Government for the people, by the people. And that is what we are celebrating here today. Now, in our recent history, we saw some grave challenges to our democracy, with factions of our nation seeking to challenge the authority of our institutions. And what we saw on January 6th is a reminder that we must cherish our democracy. We must understand that many people around the world see our experiment in democracy as the test case for whether governance by the people can work for all people in all places. And so with that, we are celebrating today democracy and freedom and the role of the 5 freedoms that are protected by the US Constitution in elevating our ability to actually shape our democracy in the direction that we want to see it go. And for that, and with that, I would like to welcome the great Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She is Speaker of the US House of Representatives. She is a daughter of Baltimore. Of course, she moved to San Francisco and now represents California in the US House of Representatives. But she was also a great friend of Elijah. Yeah. He considered her one of his mentors. And he literally looked up to her and respected her voice, her direction, and her competence. And so with that, and she is a great champion of democracy. With that, I'd like to say welcome, Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Maya, for your very kind words of welcome. More especially, though, thank you for your leadership in the community and keeping our Elijah's important words in the forefront for all of us to heed. He was our North Star in the Congress. He continues to be that guiding light for us. Yes, I'm from Baltimore. Elijah was my Baltimore brother. I loved him so much. We shared so many, shall we say, values in terms of our legislative agenda, evaluations of the courage that our Congress would have to take. And he set very high standards for all of us. I have Elijah's phone number on my phone. I still am not able to erase it. I have him still close to my heart, and I hear his voice on the message. This is a very special person. Maya, you know that better than anyone. And again, we're gathered for freedom and democracy and the 5, democracy and freedom, but the five freedoms of speech and faith and press and assembly and petition. Those were freedoms that our men and women in uniform have fought for over time. Last year, more, but not 2019, well, because of COVID, we couldn't do it this year, but 2019, we observed the 75th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy. We took a big bipartisan delegation there. And why I bring it up is because what they had demonstrated there were the 5 Norman Rockwell paintings of the 5 freedoms as emblematic of what our soldiers were fighting for, what our soldiers were, Navy, all of our military personnel were fighting for. So thank you for having this focus, because it was so much about what Elijah Cummings was about. He was a magnet. On the floor when he was there, people gravitated toward him to get what he thought about this, that, or the other thing, or just to catch his aura. As a chairman of the committee, he welcomed people to the committee, the newer the better, so he could help learn their newness and teach them how to be great in the Congress of the United States. His legacy is a very strong one, not only in terms of values, that would be enough, but in terms of mentoring. Now, he used to say I was his mentor. I said, "What do you mean? You're my mentor. I'm learning more from you." It is nice to be here with so many friends of Elijah Cummings, with you, of course, Maya, so many friends, Madam Chair, Maryland Democratic Party. As we observe Martin Luther King Day, actually Martin Luther King's birthday was Friday, Elijah's today, but the whole weekend dedicated to what they stood for. Dr. King said that just peace is not just the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. In the Catholic faith, I always follow Pope Paul VI, who said, if you want peace, work for justice. So it just is an article of faith, justice. That's what Elijah Cummings was all about, justice. Justice for those in healthcare, justice in the economy, justice in our justice system, and justice on all the disparities that exist in our community, in our economy, in our society. He was a strong man. You know, he fought a number of challenges physically, but you would never know it because he was always at the top of his game. So many things he said were so peaceful. He was a fighter for peace. And Dr. King talked about nonviolence, one word, nonviolence, no hyphen, nonviolence. And in Sanskrit, the word satyagraha, that word means 2 things. It means nonviolence and it means insistence on the truth. Insistence on the truth. And Elijah Cummings always insisted on the truth, that healthcare is a right for all, not a privilege for the few, that children are, as he would always say, are messengers to the future, a future we would never see, that we can do better for our children, that we could do better in so many ways, insisting on the truth of, again, we are better than this, insisting on the truth that we need a more perfect union. He always was, well, I would use the word of Elijah, a person of integrity. Integrity was what he was all about in his beliefs, the oneness of it, the values-basedness of it, integrity and how he conducted his legislative life, his political life, and in every way. And so, again, as you celebrate the 5 freedoms, all of them have something to do with Elijah Cummings. I'm pretty excited to see his likeness. I thought it was a painting, but it's not, and I won't say what it is. But let's just think of him up in heaven. Oh my gosh, this year, this terrible year. But remember, the send-off he had in the capital of the United States, lying in state, son of descendant of sharecroppers, you said raised in Jim Crow South, product of Maryland, coming forth to the Congress, lying in state. Very few people have that privilege in a very strong, packed and jammed, bipartisan way for people. And then Barack Obama, the President of the United States, speaking at his service in Baltimore. I mean, Elijah, how about that? How about when he says, now that he's in heaven, when we're dancing with the angels, question will be asked, what did we do to protect our democracy? That question, when he was with us and said it, resonated with us. But now the threat that we see to our democracy is driven home even more clearly. So on behalf of all of our members, Democrats and Republicans, both sides of the Capitol, both sides of the aisle, showed up for Elijah to bid him goodbye, cared about him, respected him, feared him. Well, let's say respect, but what would be the right word? Acknowledged his power and his greatness. We just are so glad that many more people will know so much more about what he did, what he meant to our democracy, what a super patriot he was. And I, in my case, what a great personal friend. I loved him very much. I miss him every day. Still on my phone. And I appreciate the honor of being with all of you to celebrate Elijah in connection with democracy and freedom, the 5 freedoms. Thank you, Maya, for your tremendous leadership in so many ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for your leadership. We definitely appreciate everything you're doing for the nation. So thank you so much. And with that, today in Baltimore City, it is Elijah E. Cummings Day since this is his birthday. But, of course, the nation is celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday. And this man was absolutely a hero for the nation in terms of what he did to uplift the whole notion that freedom has to be fought for and that we have to move towards justice, just as Speaker Pelosi said. And so with that, we are going to actually hear a serenade to our heroes from none other than Miss Liz Vaughn of Houston, Texas. Now, Liz, I gotta tell you, is a special person because not only is she just a masterful vocalist, not only is she heard and has she been heard and performing with many greats like Beyonce and others, but Liz is also my line sister. And so with that, Liz, welcome. And you're going to introduce your performance.
Thank you very much, Maya, and thank you so much for including me in such a momentous occasion. Dr. King and Congressman Cummings, as well as President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, have all shown such determination and dedication and a sense of togetherness that we, the American people, are so desperately in need of today. And for that, I deem them all heroes. And so I'm honored to present this song as a thank you to them for their service. They are the wind beneath our wings.
It must have been cold there in my shadow to never have some light on your face. You were content to let me shine, 'cause that's your way. And you always walked a step behind. I was the one for the glory. You were the one for the strength. Hey, a beautiful
so very talented. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your talent with the world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I'm so honored to be a part.
All right, thank you. So with that, everyone knows that Elijah published his book, We're Better Than This, My Fight for the Future of Our Democracy with Jim Dale. It was published back in September. And blessedly, Speaker Pelosi actually wrote the foreword for the book. And we also have the various eulogies and the service speeches that were given during his service in the book as well. But you know, Elijah spent the better part of the last year of his life working on this book because he believed so firmly that our nation was in danger and our democracy was in danger. He wanted to make sure that people understood the threat. And so he brought this book to life along with the co-author Jim Dale. And he was able to basically share his story and talk about why he felt democracy was important. He would not have been able to rise to who he became in life if it had not been for his ability to speak out, to protest, certainly to leverage those 5 freedoms in order to transform his life and that of other people. And so with that, he believed that we're better than this. He believed it with all of his heart. And so I am just delighted to, of course, bring to you a stellar panel of intellectuals, activists, people from around the country who are actually thinking about these issues of democracy and who can give us better insight. And so with that, Yvette Lewis, we'll go ahead and start with you. You know, Elijah, of course, you knew him well. You considered him a great friend. And so he always said, we're better than this. Given what's happened over, of course, since the election and of course on January 6th, would you say that he's right or wrong?
I will never say Elijah is wrong about anything, first of all. Let me begin by thanking you for allowing me to be here. You've got me in an awkward position because I was already emotional hearing Elijah's voice. And Elizabeth, you just kind of pushed me over the edge a little bit with that song. That was absolutely beautiful and such a loving tribute for today. You know, when you ask about us being better than this, I think we can be better than this. And I think the vast majority of Americans want to be better than this. 81 million Americans said that in this last election, that we want to be better than this by electing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be our next president and vice president. There are those that are filled with hate, but I consider those a minority. I consider the majority of Americans who want a better country, who want to serve, who want to love, who want to engage, who want to be neighbors, who want to be citizens, who want to be family, and who want to be friends. So I see that as what our mission is, to work towards that. You know, when Elijah said we're better than this, I interpreted it a little differently. I don't think his argument was that we are perfect. I think what he was saying is quite the opposite. I think he said we had the potential and that we should always strive for that potential to be as good as we possibly can be. And he said it every single day, and he lived it every single day. And he imparted that to all of us. And when you heard Elijah, and as you carry his legacy on, and Maya, thank you so much for doing this, you do want to be better. You do want to strive for that perfection that Elijah sought in all of us. So I think that we can be, and I think that we will be. And I think that as we turn a page on Wednesday, it's going to be the mission of all of us to strive for that.
So, you know, the last 4 years have been quite rough. We've seen leadership in this country that has basically trampled on democratic norms, ignored the Constitution, certainly co-opted agencies that are supposed to serve the people for, his own purposes. And so through all of this, would you say that our democratic institutions have held or have failed?
Well, let's look at what's happened with our democratic institutions over the last 4 years, or just over the last several months. Trump has challenged the elections. He's had lawsuits. The lawsuits have been thrown out, even by the Supreme Court en masse. When it was time for our state governments to step up, they stepped up and they certified the vote. Then when it was time, even though there was a disruption, for the electors' votes to be cast so that the election could be finally certified and we would have a new president and vice president, that held. So I do think that our institutions have held. You know, one of the things that I think that we need to keep in mind, though, as we move forward, we can never stop talking about what needs to be done and how we can do it. I think that we can strengthen the resistance, but I think the resistance needs to be coupled with reimagining. And by that, I mean, we can identify the problem, but we also offer solutions for the problem. We're not just going to resist, we're going to show a better way of doing it. That's what will keep our institutions strong as well, if we as Americans take on that mantle. I think that if we find ourselves living in this new paradigm of constantly working for what is better, I think that we'll live up to the principles that Elijah set forth every single day with his life. I cannot overstate the importance of having a president and a Congress who want to make positive changes. I think that that means economic revitalization, criminal justice reform, investments in education, healthcare, and so much more. But we'll be able to do that, and we'll be able to strengthen our institutions because we will have willing partners now. We will be able to turn opportunities out of obstruction, right? And we'll be able to move forward in that way. I'm very excited about the future. I'm very excited about where we're headed. I'm very excited that we are striving to be better. Speaker Pelosi, who we all just adore. Yes, she is California, but Maryland will forever love her and claim her as our own. You know, we're talking about healing this country, but we need to understand that healing includes a recognition that peace is not just a calming of the waters. That is not what peace is. It's exactly what she said. Peace is justice for all.
Thank you so much. And I should just mention that Yvette Lewis is the chair of the Maryland Democratic Party. She is, as you can hear, very capable and a great leader. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Baltimore City Councilman Zeke Cohen also was a friend of Elijah. Welcome, Zeke.
Thank you so much. Honored.
Councilman Cohen serves at the local level, and as everyone knows, local government is where the rubber meets the road. And so, you know, for me, my question to you, Councilman Cohen, is: do you think our democratic processes are working from your vantage point?
So first, let me just sincerely thank you, Maya, for inviting me, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, and for honoring the late, great Congressman Cummings and for all that you do to carry on his legacy. You know, I do think that our institutions are deeply challenged right now. You know, we live in a city, and Speaker Pelosi grew up here, where there are profound disparities in education, in wealth, in health, in life expectancy. To be a child that's born in Roland Park means that you will probably live on average 20 years longer than a child born in Sandtown, Winchester. I started my career as a teacher in West and South Baltimore. I taught in two schools that lacked heat, that lacked drinkable running water, that lacked air conditioning, that really physically resembled prisons. And so to be a child that grows up in a city like Baltimore, to know its beauty, its potential, but also its pain, I do think that our democratic institutions at the local, state, and federal level are deeply, deeply, deeply challenged right now.
So you should explain to people how far Sandtown, Winchester is from Roland Park.
It's not far at all. It's within 1.5 miles. And you know, it's the lived experiences could not be more different. Sandtown, where I taught, has a high abundance of children who are poisoned by lead paint. Young people that grow up there experience, around 56% of children that grow up there experience at least one or more major traumas early on in their life. It is a place where, you know, the irony of it is that it was the Black art and cultural mecca of Baltimore in its day. It's where Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong would all come to play. But due to disinvestment, due to redlining and government sponsored abandonment, Sandtown fell into a serious disrepair. And now it's a really challenged place, but it still has beauty, it still has potential, and it still has enormous opportunity. But it is a tough place to grow up.
And the racial and socioeconomic condition of both places?
So Roland Park is mostly white. Sandtown is almost all Black. And, I would just say that, thinking about what we need on the local, state, and federal level, it's really folks like Elijah Cummings, who, Speaker Pelosi said had so much integrity and who truly, truly loved the children of our city. I'll never forget, I used to come and speak. He had this Elijah Cummings Youth in Israel program where he would bring together Black and Jewish kids from Park Heights. And then he would have them go through a leadership training and then have them go on a trip to Israel together, and their lives would be forever transformed. I had the great privilege of getting to come and speak and sort of stand in as the Jewish politician who got to come and speak to the young people. And I will never forget the last year of Elijah Cummings' life. He brought this group of young people to Loyola University. I was like the warm-up act. Like I did a couple minutes and the kids were like, all right, enough. And then Congressman Cummings came on, and he just spoke, as we all know, he spoke from the soul, and he talked about the saving our democracy. And he talked about what it means to grow up in Baltimore, to experience racial housing segregation, to experience trauma, to experience violence. He spoke so deeply to these young people, and you could literally hear a pin drop. And you got to remember, this is the last year of his life. So he was both very physically ill, as we know he had been for a while, but he was also literally in the battle for the soul of our democracy. He was prosecuting President Trump in the court of Congress. I mean, he was one of the most powerful and important people in the world. And here he was at Loyola University with about 30 teenagers, Black and Jewish. And, he when he got done, I mean, it was like these young people went nuts. They were cheering and shouting. And he said, as they're going crazy, he said, wait, I'm not finished. And he kept speaking. And for another 40 or so minutes, the man kept speaking. And so to me, what that said is, this isn't someone who just talks about loving children or being with people. This is someone who truly, truly lived it, because he could have been anywhere in the world. And there he was with a group of teenagers on a random Sunday afternoon, pouring out his heart and soul so that they could be great. And that was my mentor. And again, it's just an honor to be here honoring him today.
Well, actually, he viewed that as one of his missions in life, to actually help young people become all that they could be. And one of the goals of the book was to make sure that, he could impart his wisdom and lessons to them, to show that if you had challenges, that you could overcome them. And so with that, I'm glad that you brought that story to the fore. But then I've got to go to our sister LaTosha Brown, because she has been all over the South, working with young voters and older voters, and non-voters, and people who actually believe that voting isn't important, through her Black Voters Matter Fund. She just had a major victory, helping to turn Georgia blue and tipping the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. So welcome, Ms. LaTosha Brown. You have been a champion for increasing voter turnout across the country. So thank you. In your experience, what has to be activated or overcome in the minds of new voters and non-voters in order to ignite and sustain their civic participation? Because we're talking about government for the people, by the people. That means that people have to be active, right?
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I wanted to start, as I always, really start with song, because I do think it's something about grounding us in our humanity. But I really like, that's a song that was Fannie Lou Hamer's favorite song. And it also happened to be my grandmother's favorite song, but more so the words of it. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. If there's anything that I do, like even around voting, right? I know that there are those that want to convince people on voting and it's powerful. It's a powerful tool. I know there are those that want to convince people around how the system of democracy works. But if all of my work is really rooted in this notion of helping people to feel like that they matter, that they have a light, and that they are worthy and they have value, and that people who feel a sense of value and feel a sense of their agency, voting is just icing on the cake. What has actually happened, particularly in this country, racism and poverty and as Dr. King talked about, the three, evils of militarism and poverty and racism has literally dampened the spirits of our people. And so when we're talking about how do we lift up young folks, part of it is really affirming them, affirming that they have value, to affirm that whether you live, where you go to school, who your parents are, does not decide whether you should be treated with dignity and respect, but that in fact you have power and that you have agency. And so the work that we do at Black Voters Matter is literally, we talk about spreading love and building power. That yes, we talk about voting. Yes, we talk about the importance of voting, but that's not where we lead from. We lead from the premise of letting people, literally listening to people, literally being able, it doesn't matter whether you're a voter or not. It doesn't matter. I was doing an interview and a reporter asked me, why did I spend so much time talking to children? And I looked at him, I was like, because children matter. That at the end of the day, if we're literally creating a culture that says that every single human being that has value and that they are worthy to be listened to, that they are worthy to create a process around agency, that when we're talking about voting, then that will become secondary. And so even when I talk about what is the role of democracy? Part of democracy is only as good as it facilitates what I know to be true. And that is every single human being has the power, should have the power to really be able to utilize their agency so that they are making decisions and choices about what governs them, who governs them, and under what conditions. That is where the power is. And so I think oftentimes we look at politics and organizing politics like as if the people are a proxy in their own power, instead of literally centering the politics in that the people have power. And so our work that we do with young people, we do kind of like three things. That part of it is, and for young voters and voters disengaged, my goal is not to convince people to believe in a system that they actually see day in and day out discriminate against them, that they see day in and day out marginalize them. My goal is to convince people that they themselves have power, and that when they operate in their agency, that they can actually create, recreate, reimagine every single system that governs their lives. That is what my goal is. And so when I am talking and organizing people, it is centered around the belief that our power was given by our Creator, that in fact we have value, that we have, no matter where we are, right, that we have value, and that if we operate in that collective power and that agency, then systems have to change, that elected leadership has to change, that all those things around us will change. And so that's what the biggest goal is. I do think that sometimes when we're doing this political piece, we use guilt, like, you have to vote because someone died for you, and that's true. And somebody fought for you, that's true. I'm a native of Selma, Alabama. My whole life, I grew up being surrounded by people who had sacrificed for me to be here, right? But ultimately, if there's one thing that my work that I hope to do is to remind people that they are worthy. They're worthy in their humanity to be treated with dignity and respect, and be able to actually have a system where they can utilize their agency to make a determination of what, who, and under what conditions governs them.
So, in activating that worthiness, is there a process that you see where it comes alive? Do they get it right away, or is there a process?
No, I think it's a process. I think you have to be an organizer. You have to meet people where they are. And I think part of part of what I think is really interesting, particularly what I noticed and a frustration, you know, someone who grew up in the deep South, folks got a whole lot of advice for Black folk, and people got a whole lot of advice for poor folks. They tell you what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to think, where you're supposed to be. You wouldn't be this if you didn't do that, right? You know, what I have learned as the most powerful tool of organizing is in listening. That part of what we did before we started Black Voters Matter, Cliff and I got in a car and we literally went down to 7 states in the South, we were down in the back roads where there was lights. You couldn't even see your hand in front of your face when the lights went off. And what we would do was actually listen to people. And oftentimes you can listen to people, you can listen to what they're saying. And if you're really listening and paying attention, you can actually hear what they're not saying. And so part of our work is really being able to create grace and space so that we can listen to people. So we're listening to what they're saying and what they're not saying. And that when we're in relationship, building relationship with folks, you know, oftentimes there's we did an interview with CNN a couple of, maybe 2 years ago, and there was a young man who we walked up to. He's like, oh yeah, I ain't doing that vote thing. I don't believe in it, X, Y, Z. And he expected us to move away. And we were like, okay, that's fine, but what is it that you care about? Literally, we were like, we ain't got to talk about voting. You don't want to vote, fine. We put our paper up. Tell us we want to know more about you. Like, what is it you care about, brother? And so in the course of us talking to him, right, we literally just sat there and chopped it up with him because we were interested in really knowing what is it, like in our organizing, what is it that we need to aware of? Teach us, what is it that we need to know? And how could we have this a real authentic exchange? And it was interesting because as we were like, we had a wonderful discussion as we were getting ready to walk off. He was like, well, I want to register. And I was like, well, I thought you ain't want to register. He said, no, but I want to register now. I want to register. Now y'all got me hyped. Part of it, the reason why I'm raising that is part of the reason why people disengage in the process is not because they don't care, right? People disengage in the process because they don't see themselves. They don't see their power in it. They don't believe that it cares for them. And so I think part of what we have to do is radically reimagine this system and really shift the political framework that is not really about it's not about the power that goes to political parties. It's not even about power that goes to political candidates, although we certainly want accountable parties and candidates. But literally, if we can center what the Constitution says. It doesn't say we the political parties. It doesn't say we the candidates. It doesn't say we the elected officials. It says we the people. And we can really center this belief around for the love of humanity. Like that's how I lead from, that policy is shaped for the love of humanity. That how would policy look? If our leaders were looking at every decision through the prism of for the love of humanity, what decisions, how would they make decisions? Right? How would they literally move forward? And so all of our work, you know, and even in that, as you say, it's a process. It is a process for us and a process for me to remind people that their humanity matters and that love is a powerful tool that can actually be transformative and that they can, in fact, be the founders of a new nation, a nation that centers people over profit, a nation that literally, that we don't put children in cages because they have a different color passport, a nation that doesn't call folks aliens like they're from a different country, a different planet, but that a country that literally, as we're bragging on being the wealthiest country in the world, we would become the country that takes care of people. That is an example of how do you operate and govern in a way that people know that you love humanity.
Thank you, Ms. LaTosha Brown. That actually is a perfect segue to Rashad Robinson, who is the president of Color of Change. I've got to say, Rashad, that when my brother, you know, he was at the local level, he ran for office, he called Elijah and he said, you know, what should I do in order to win? Elijah said, listen. What LaTosha just said, Elijah said, listen to the people. Listen to the people. And Rashad, I've seen you in the halls of Congress. I've seen you taking on tech titans. I've seen you, you testifying. You have been everywhere trying to get people to listen. So I want to hear about your perspective in terms of how to move the needle on social justice in this country. What do you view as the role of protest, advocacy, and representation in making our democracy a reliable vehicle for social justice and change?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. Maya, thank you for your leadership of this work and for continuing to bring Congressman Cummings' memory and work to us in so many ways. We're all better for it. To the other panelists, Speaker Pelosi, Chairwoman, Councilman, my dear, dear friend LaTosha, who I never want to follow, but now I have to. I will just say this. First of all, I think about the intersection of all those things a lot, and I think about them in the view of power, much the way that LaTosha was talking about. Color of Change was founded just about a little over 15 years ago in the aftermath of the flood, which was Hurricane Katrina. It was caused by bad decision makers and turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. Black folks were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something and left to die. And the thing that Katrina illustrated that I think is important today and animates the way in which we think about the work and the way in which I think about how to move the ball forward is that it illustrated things that people already knew: geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what we've done to our planet, all the ways in which structural racism undergirds all of those things. But at the heart of it, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. And when institutions are not nervous about disappointing your community, it doesn't always matter what other things you have. You could have good information. You could sometimes have good law, but if you can't implement it. And so what we try to do is recognize that we have to translate presence, visibility, awareness into power, because power is the ability to change the rules. And so yes, protest is important. When that protest is directed at places for which showing up as a protest will actually have leverage. Yes, the work of policy is important when behind it, you have the power to implement it, enforce it, hold the institutions accountable. It means nothing to raise minimum wage if we don't have money in it to enforce corporations, to enforce policies on corporations who may not actually adhere to it, to help people understand that they have access to it, to help raise energy and attention around people to know what demands they have in the workplace. All of that is incredibly important. But far too often we mistake presence for power. So we think that we've done something that we haven't done. Presence is not bad. Presence and visibility is incredibly important. But when we mistake presence for power, we can mistake a Black president for thinking that we are post-racial. We can sometimes think that America's love for Black celebrities and Black culture means that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture. And America can love, celebrate, and monetize Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And those two things don't have to be in conflict. And so constantly we have to recognize that as our issues get more presence, as we come out of a summer where the majority of Americans said that structural racism exists, where the majority of Americans said that they understood systemic racism was something that Black people face, where racial justice became a majoritarian issue, not a governing majority yet, a majoritarian issue. The work ahead is translating that majoritarian issue into a governing majority, translating that presence and visibility into power. And that is the intersection about how we move things forward. Not just how do we change policies, but how do we make sure those policies are enforced? Not just how we change culture, but how do we make sure that culture translates into a different lived experience every single day in people's lives.
Wow, Rashad, thank you for that. Always on not just the activist front, but also on the intellectual front, you bring us so much. I'd like to actually turn to Keith Berwick. Keith and I met years ago through the Aspen Institute Henry Crown Fellowship, where he served as the original executive director of that program, the founding executive director. And Keith is a historian who connects the past to the present to help us imagine the future. Keith, what we just heard from both LaTosha, certainly from Rashad, and our other panelists is a formula for envisioning and recreating and implementing literally a new nation, a new way forward, a new nation out of an old nation. Is that even possible? Can we do that? And, you know, certainly what we saw on January 6th in terms of the violence at the US Capitol is something that we have to be mindful of. Rashad mentioned structural racism. And we saw elements of that on January 6th, where mob violence with a structurally racist undertone basically sought to take over the US Capitol. What should this country do to make sure that we can address these issues in a way that moves us towards a multiracial, multicultural democracy, pluralistic democracy that recognizes the basic humanity in every person?
Maya, I want first to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I am just awash in insight and inspiration from you all. And I remember vividly in our Henry Crown Fellowship program, which is based upon the search for social justice, for the good, for the role of leaders in creating the conditions of the good society and living the good life in the sense of the Aristotelian proposition. What I most believe is that we have to get back to the promise of the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence propounds a theory of equality that is so profound that it not only exceeded the capabilities of the founding father generation, so-called, but we haven't even plumbed its depths philosophically and morally, let alone put them into practice. But as a historian, I feel a sense of shame that the history that we have taught and the history that we have been learning and still are learning in many schools that are still rigidly segregated is a whitewashed history, a history that is embedded in the myth, as James Baldwin always put it, of white supremacy, of white privilege, white domination. Fish don't know that they're swimming in water. And white people, those of us who think ourselves white, are for much of our history and even today, unconscious of who we are, let alone what we might become. And I do believe, as we know, that the doctrine of equality is in the process of becoming. And I have never been more hopeful than I am today in the light of and the darkness of this present moment of pandemic. I believe the pandemic is trying to teach us something about the interconnectedness of all human life and all life, the flora and fauna, and the whole environment in which we live on the planet Earth. And so the human experiment is being tested as never before, let alone the experiment of a constitutional democracy. Now, my introduction to the cause of social justice came after 17 years in Toronto, where I lived in a white cocoon. I never met a Black person. I never met a person of color until the time when my brother, aged 19 and I 17, my brother committed suicide, and for that and other complex reasons, my family moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Gerald Ford was the local congressman. And I discovered social justice in the Crispus Attucks American Legion post in the bowels of Grand Rapids, where, as one who had played cello, I went down and was able to sit in with bass with jazz musicians who were both white and Black. And after a time, since they were passing a hat for money, I asked them if I couldn't help get them jobs around Western Michigan in high schools, colleges, and so on. They said, "Oh, be our guest." And that was when Red Bennett's Boptet was born. You've never heard of it, but I was Red Bennett. I had auburn hair and my middle name is Bennett. And they insisted that I head up the band. They were real musicians, I was not. This was just a short time in my life. But I discovered that there were many, many white people who didn't appreciate Black and white musicians playing together. And that was a recognition for me. Now, I came of age intellectually back in the 1950s. And at that time, I realized that the fierce urgency of now was expressing itself in ways that were really profound and that demanded action. For me, the shame of my profession has been that so much of the history that we've taught has been misguided and has failed to acknowledge the role of people of color in this country, the role of women in this country, and the kind of leadership that the sheer act of survival demands of them. So we are dealing with racial and gender inequity and iniquity because we are still, in many cases, unconscious. And yet, I believe that in this present period of the pandemic and of the chaos in the Capitol on January 6th is a source of hope, because I believe that white people are beginning to understand that the real leaders, the real models of human behavior in our society have been among those people who have had to struggle with all of the deprivation, all of the subjugation of Black people. And I believe that the promise of Elijah Cummings is particularly important because he has worked, his career was entirely within the legislative realm, along with Nancy Pelosi and others. And politicians are getting a very bad reputation by and large at a time when, as a matter of fact, we have real profiles in courage, and particularly among female and among Black leaders. And I think that that is the voice of the future. So one of the great mentors of my early coming of age was Reinhold Niebuhr in The Irony of American History, published in 1952. And when I think of Elijah, I think of this. He wrote, "Nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in a lifetime. Therefore, we are saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing that we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we are saved by love. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as it is from our standpoint. Therefore, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness." Now, in the course of our fellowship, Maya, that's where I met Elijah personally. He came into our circle. I sensed his warmth, his passion, all of the things that we've been talking about and that we recognize. And I believe that he is an exemplar of the kind of leadership that we need and that will be the answer to the question you're asking. Because I believe that we are all in the process of becoming. That, after all, is what Michelle Obama called her book, Becoming. And I think we are becoming, and I believe that the testimony of all of you on this panel so far speaks to that in a way that is vivid. Now, there's another thing that I'd like to bring to your attention, because you and I, Maya, in a close moment of a kind of personal crisis a number of years ago, talked about Thich Nhat Hanh. he is he is the Vietnamese monk who, and I'm looking at a little book now called How to Fight. And along with Elijah's book, I think these are two of the most important books for us all to read. And he talks about loving your enemy. And he says, man is not your enemy. The real enemy is our ignorance and our attachment to views and our wrong perceptions. With looking deeply and the practice of compassionate dialogue, we can transform misperceptions and anger into understanding and love. And I believe profoundly in the tensile strength of love. Many people, I mean, Martin Luther King spoke so vividly about love in all of its various aspects. And it is powerful. It is powerful. And the game of power, I believe, must come through the filter of love.
And you also said the doctrine of equality is in the process of becoming. So becoming is a central theme. And with that, I just like to remind our viewing audience that you can actually input questions for all of our panelists in the Q&A section down at the bottom of the screen. Input your questions in the Q&A feed so that we can actually feed those questions when we get to the Q&A section. But I want to go directly to Bishop Walter Thomas Sr., Walter Scott Thomas Sr. He is my pastor. He was Elijah's pastor for more than 30 years. He was Elijah's best friend. If you read it in the book, Elijah talks about him at length. And like Dr. King, Bishop Thomas is a scholar of the Bible. And has deep insight. And so when Dr. King spoke of, obviously, political power, he spoke of economic power, but he also talked about this concept of moral power. Bishop Thomas, you know, how should moral power be exercised at this moment in history, especially in light of what we saw on January 6th in Washington, D.C.?
Thanks, Maya, for inviting me to be a part of this first symposium. This is a real tribute to Elijah and to Dr. King, and it's a statement on where we are right now. It seems strange to talk about moral power because those are two words that seem to go in different directions. When you think of moral, that which is moral, you think of that which is good, that which is ideal, that which is altruistic. When you think of power, you often think of that which is self-serving and based in self-interest. So it would seem that the two would run at different courses. But this idea of moral power implies that there is a sense that a man or a woman has some kind of moral compass that directs their life. And they use it in such a way as to persuade others to move into some positive direction. And if ever that was needed, it is now, because what we're finding now, and I think Elijah would with great force speak to this, our society is not reaching for the highest. It is reaching for what is attainable that will make it satisfied. Elijah dreamed, as many of our mothers and fathers, that we would have an opportunity to, as Keith read, go beyond a lifetime with what we're searching for, and that our hope would carry us like those arrows into the future, and something positive, really positive, would be brought forth. But we're living in an era now when folk are using the quote unquote ideal, the moral, the good, to really mask their efforts to get the low-hanging fruit of self-interest. They are using, I hate to put it this way when we talk about faith communities, they're using their moral standing in community to persuade people to act and to participate in activity that is anything but moral. It is almost, whereas one seems an oxymoron to speak of, this seems to be almost a gross contradiction. How can I be moral? And as one of the speakers said, at the same time encouraging people put in cages? How can I be reaching for the best in society and at the same time be looking for the speaker and the president or the president of the Senate, the vice president of the United States in the halls of the Capitol to do harm to them, and yet be egged on by persons who claim to have a moral position in life? I think one of the things that Elijah would call us to, and that we need to recognize in this era, that a nation is judged by its actions because its actions betray its beliefs. Beliefs are fine to state, but the nation is judged by its actions. The Bible says faith without works is dead. It's judged by its actions. And so therefore we have to learn to reduce in society and learn to reduce in our conversation faith to intentional actions, things that are intentional. And they betray what we believe in. What happens now, we hear this, and I hate to say it's in so much of our faith community, this lofty rhetoric that when the actions come, you realize these actions don't present the kingdom as we know it. These actions don't present the moral path we're trying to travel. I guess I was really perturbed when I heard so many people acting as if they did not understand the plight in America. Now, I did not find that understandable because most of those persons were Americans. They had grown up with the television portrayal. They had grown up with the actions on the streets. They had grown up knowing that places were denied to others. And so to hear them speak and use their voices for actions that were anything but what would lead us to something better made you know that they were not presenting some moral power, but really some immoral power, because they were using their power to hold people back and not spur people on. When LaTosha started singing "This Little Light of Mine," my church roots started jumping up, and the wind under my wings, I started feeling myself rocking. And I said, oh, now we're going to have a little church. And when they quoted Reinhold Niebuhr, quoted Niebuhr, I said, okay, now we're going solidly to church in here. And yet you will see religious figures advocating and pontificating everything but that which brings us to the places that they spoke of and sang about. And that's why our democracy is in such danger, because people who have the moral position, who have the quote unquote authority, are using that power to move people in the wrong direction. One of the simplest, and then I'll be finished on this, one of the simplest definitions of the kingdom is trying to bring about life as God imagined it. When we talk about the kingdom of God, trying to bring about life and bring people into the life that God imagined. I cannot believe that some of what we are seeing, people actually believe is the life that God imagined. And we have to fight against everything that moves us beyond that picture. This is the life God imagined for his people, for his children. And this is the life we must use our moral power to bring about.
So, when you talk about bringing this about, what is that? What is America's, in your view, a land of Canaan or the promised land. What is that vision? And I think we've heard elements of it offered by LaTosha and some others. But, you know, in your opinion, how do we move towards that more perfect democracy? And what does it look like?
This may sound difficult. We have to, you know, part of the conversation has been on listening. One of my professors, Judith Glaser, used to say, the next great move of society is going to be dependent upon the culture. And the next great move of culture, and culture is dependent upon relationships. And the quality of relationship is dependent upon conversation, the quality of the conversations, because everything starts with a conversation. We have to start having conversations, what we call level 3 conversations, not level 1, ask, tell, where you already know what you want to hear. Not level 2 conversations where you're trying to persuade me, but level 3 conversations where we ask questions for which we don't have answers. And we try to seek answers together and grow together. We have to one group has to stop believing it has all the answers for Black people. It knows what Black people need, the paternalistic force. And the other group has to stop believing that it has, by power of entitlement, the right to everything, and it then can determine who can have anything. And we have to start a conversation with folks where we ask questions for which we don't have answers to build a society where people have opportunity and possibility. It has to start with conversations. You know, I believe that everything starts with a conversation on how we transform this country, and a conversation on how we transform society. Transforming this country so that it can accept a truth that includes us all, and transforming society into bringing about change and programmatic change. Doing both, but beginning that conversation and not letting folk passively or politely dismiss it. Demanding that this conversation be held. You know, we sit and beg permission to talk. No, this conversation must be held, and you must be held accountable to have it. You must be. I think the election was an effort to say there must be accountability in this country. You know, there are many metrics by which you can use to evaluate this election, but I choose to use the one that says that we finally said there must be some accountability for who we are.
You know, I think that's interesting because I think African Americans feel like we are always held to account. And so, you know, the whole notion of the double standard, I think, is very real. And that's why we're talking about a nation for all that works for all. So with that, I am going to, we're going to open it up to our panelists and the Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge that this event is an official Biden-Harris Presidential Inaugural Committee Day of Service event. So I want to thank everyone who showed up as a part of recognizing this Martin Luther King Day of Service, but certainly also the historic election and the wonderful election of the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris ticket, who will take office in just a couple of short days. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to the Presidential Inaugural Committee for designating us an approved Day of Service event. Tori Livingston, can you tell us what kind of questions that we have in the queue? You want to go ahead and direct it to the person that it's intended for?
Absolutely. And thank you, Maya, for starting the conversation, for having the insight and the leadership to get this day going. You have worked hard for everything that you put together, and we just want to thank you and just applaud the leadership that you have. Now, and all you're getting, this Bible says, to get an understanding. And so the way that you could do that is by having the conversation, as the bishop said so well. And the different questions that we have in the chat box is, or in the question and answering session, is indicative of what the audience is looking at. The first question, Mr. Berwick, they just wanted to Nell, what is the source of the quotes about hope, faith, and forgiveness that you gave?
That is Reinhold Niebuhr, a book entitled The Irony of American History, published first in 1952. Niebuhr was one of the great theologians and intellectuals of the last century, and I think his words speak to us still.
Thank you so much. And that question was asked by Marianne. The second question by Asha is fairly lengthy, but we'll go forward. How shall we move forward using our skills in diverse fields as people of color to support, and this is to the whole audience, all the panelists, excuse me. How should we move forward using our skills in diverse fields as people of color to support our Black colleagues in the struggle for equity and representation, treatment, and opportunity for advancement? That's one question. I'll stop there and let the panelists reflect, and whoever wants to take that question, go forward.
You know, one thing, and I talked about racial justice becoming a majoritarian issue this summer. You know, sometimes when we talk about racial justice and we think about racial justice and we hear people talk about the work of racial justice, they talk about it as fighting racism or ending racism, and that's good and that's important. But what I want to contend and what I want to settle us in is that racial justice is also our most powerful motivating force, right? This summer, when many of us thought the best that could be done in terms of activism was clapping outside of our windows for essential workers, which was so important, and uplifting investigative journalism, it was racial justice that powered people into the streets, powered people online. It actually led in many ways to that spike in voter registration this summer that in so many ways powered young people and supported the work that LaTosha and myself and so many other folks. And so I don't want us to simply think about racial justice as the moral thing we do or the charitable thing we do, or even the thing we do so that, you know, we do the right thing for Black and brown communities. But what of it if we center racial justice as the most strategic force multiplier for change? Because far too often across all of those different sectors that the person who asked the question named, it is the norms, policies, and practices centered in racial injustice that have gotten us in the problem that we've faced. And so if we can center racial justice, we not only mobilize tens, thousands, hundreds, millions of people to action, but we actually end up dealing with the issues at hand, the systemic failures. And so whether it's we want to face down the climate, racial justice is our most powerful force in dealing with climate. If we want to deal with jobs and healthcare, racial justice is our most powerful force multiplier. Across all of these sectors, racial justice is our path forward. And so that means Black folks, Latinx folks, we're not the majority, but racial justice is. And that means we have to build strong multiracial alliances that power that forward, but constantly recognizing that we can't solve these problems if we think about racial justice as an after effect. The thing I will end on is that far too often we are talking about how do we get a true democracy? And it's a result of where we're at in this country. But my contention for all of us is that, you know, we're not going to get racial justice out of a true democracy. Racial justice will actually be the driving force that gets us a true democracy. And if we can center racial justice, if we can get behind racial justice, we can not only power more people to participation, we can actually win in the ways that actually move us forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question is by Ajeda Hall. On the issue of what we teach about Black folks, is there a culturally relevant Black history curriculum you would recommend?
I think that there is the 1619 Project did a wonderful job at putting a curricula together that is free, is accessible, you can get to it. And so just for the sake, I think there's many sources, but a source that I think, is a great source in the context of it gives history, but even recognizing what moment that we're in right now and in the context of kind of modern history is the curricula that goes with 1619 Project.
Skip Gates, who does work that's accessible on television, and I think has been one of our most enlightened current Black historians, and there are any number of others.
Wonderful. The next question by Danielle Smith. Can you ask each of the panelists in their opinion, what is their formula for where do we go from here? What should the new administration focus on day one?
Well, let me just say this and intercede and say that is a huge question and we have too many panelists to answer it. But how about we go to our fearless leader, Speaker Pelosi, to basically talk about your view on the agenda and what the Biden-Harris administration is going to accomplish.
I think it all comes back to the original question of justice. We have to have justice as our fundamental. I always, sometimes my colleagues across the aisle don't like me quoting a religious person, St. Augustine, 17 centuries ago. Keith, 17 centuries ago, he said, any government that is not formed to promote justice is just a bunch of thieves. And we see that in our work. The fact is, it's all about justice in every possible way. If you want peace, work for justice, Paul. If you want justice is not, peace is not the absence of division, it is the presence of justice. We keep coming back to it. So as we go forward, we have to kind of think in a different way. One of the fights I had during the COVID fights and the rest is they would say things like, oh, we'll send out this money, but they were perpetuating injustice in the innards of the bill. And people said, well, just take it. Anything's better than nothing. No, the perfect should not be the enemy of the good. I haven't seen the good yet because they were always using a gift as a way to perpetuate injustice. So we have important work to do, but I'm excited about the prospect. As Keith mentioned, even the COVID thing maybe is a new opportunity for us to think in a different way. When you see the injustice of that, whether it's testing, tracing, treatment, separation, vaccine, all the rest, let's just pull back that curtain of injustice and just say, how would we do this if we didn't know how we did it before? It's what we have to do. Rashad said it so well. It isn't about democracy bringing this. It's about justice and respect creating the democracy. So I'm optimistic about it because it is, I mean, we've gone to such a horrible place. It breaks your heart to see that a president of the United States could use poisonous, venomous language, which is racist, anti-Semitic, and the rest. You can call it whatever else you want, but that's what much of it was about, to incite an insurrection. He spoke it, he urged it, it happened. Incitement, insurrection. Now, you would think that enough people in our country would say, enough, but some of them just won't. And we cannot go as slow as that ship. We have to have our own momentum for justice. And it is the word that dominates everything. Economic justice. Toynbee wrote about this when he said, when he studied civilizations, Keith reminds me, and I'm so glad somebody asked about the quote again, because I wrote it, I was so enchanted by it, I didn't write it down, the title and the rest, but thank you for asking again about faith, hope, and charity. When people ask me, where's hope? I say it's always where it always has been, sitting right there between faith and charity. If you believe in the goodness of others, you have hope. But anyway, Toynbee said, when societies were formed, and he studied history of civilization, that there's a flowering elite, the people who want to govern in a way that has people reach their fulfillment and flower, or the exploitive elite, who are just there for power and money. And that really is a fact here in our country, power and money, that's it. When they exist in the same society, it's a big chasm, a chasm of the political soul of the country. That's what we're going through now. But you know what? We just have to be optimistic and hopeful, show a vision, which I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will do, show a vision of fairness and justice, show a plan on how to get there, and involve people and listen to them about how they see their role in the future. It's not about telling them, it's about listening and having them help shape how we go into the future. It's going to be quite exciting. I think Joe is a great unifier and Kamala as well. I'm glad to see Brian Stevenson's name come across the chat board there. Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulating all of you panelists, and I join him in congratulating you as well. So we are going to be optimistic, realistic, and successful, because this is what our founders had in mind with a more, e pluribus unum from any one, what our men and women in uniform fight for in the military, our freedom in our country, and what our children aspire to. As Elijah always said, our children are messengers to the future.
Are living messengers to a future we will never see.
We will never see.
Speaker Pelosi, thank you so much.
This question is from Danielle Smith. Bishop Thomas, what are your thoughts on what we are experiencing today? We know from a historical perspective, this has been the modus of operandum for years, associating religion with their unlawful acts. What's your vision?
It's amazing that that is so true. Religion has often been the scapegoat for the craziest of behaviors, and the source of it has. The best way I can say it is people will use whatever they can to perpetuate the ideas that they want to put forward. If religion is the best coat to wear, they will wear that coat. If politics is, they will wear that. If the economics is, they will wear that. As Thomas Jefferson told Benjamin Banneker, you are different from the rest of the people. They will use something to present what they believe is their, or what they want to hold on to as their bedrock position. Religion has always been a scapegoat, but there have always been those through every era who sought to peel back the cover and to reveal the fact that this is not based on any biblical truth or any understanding of God, but this is based on a misguided anthropology that gives birth to a whack sociology that is grounded in a false psychology that then presents itself as a wicked theology.
Wow. We're gonna have to excerpt that and send that quote around the internet. And so with that, I want to thank every single panelist. You were absolutely fabulous. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for accepting the opportunity to be on the first ever Elijah E. Cummings Democracy and Freedom Festival. And the reason why I'm calling it a festival is because this is a celebration of democracy. We have work to do to keep it, but it's a celebration because we have it. And so with that, Desiree Kelly, we want to introduce you and welcome you and thank you for all of your wonderful, wonderful, certainly your awesome talent. And we're going to bring your video up so that people can actually see what you do and how you do it and how fabulous you are. So Miss Kelly, tell us what we are viewing and go ahead and run this
the video. Yeah. So thank you so much for having me be a part of this and unveiling this portrait. My idea behind this portrait was to commemorate Elijah Cummings and his legacy. I create portraits of historical figures and public figures. And usually I would normally do this in an oil painting, but I decided to do a picture out of thousands of buttons and found objects and coins and collage, highlighting certain moments of his life to really try to engage the audience just about, their interest in like the texture or the depth within the piece to get your interest to know more about who this person is and to relate to over different demographics And so the strategic placement of these buttons is really similar to how Cummings represent thousands of people in his efforts to fight for democracy. And my whole idea was to create this narrative into a visual summary. So to be experienced from far away, you can see collectively how all of these objects work together to form his image. And there's multiple references about Maryland and Baltimore. There's a few clippings from the Baltimore Sun, just further like connecting him in the image and from his background as well. So very similar to oil painting, it's the buildup of layers and layers, and at certain points of the image sticks out about even 3 inches in depth. And so you really, when you're up close exploring through the piece, you get to, find little hidden objects that are, in there to create his portrait. Yeah.
So that is absolutely awesome. And I think this is a perfect metaphor for why we're here today, because every single button that comes together to create this portrait, a whole, certainly an image of Elijah that we all recognize, is just like every single one of us come together to make the United States of America. Certainly, it's not about independence, it's about interdependence and how we come together to make certainly something that we should be able to work towards being all proud of. And so with that, Desiree Kelly, where are you going to actually show this here in Baltimore?
We're working on temporary placement at the moment. I'm not sure where to actually end up going, but hopefully we'll figure it out soon.
So let me just say this. I want to thank Councilman Christopher Burnett of the Baltimore City Council, who actually introduced me to Desiree Kelly and told me about this wonderful work. We want to congratulate you, Desiree Kelly, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help you get it placed here in the city of Baltimore so that people can see the wonderful work that you do. So with that, we are at the end of the very first ever Elijah E. Cummings Democracy and Freedom Festival. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. We are in a historic moment, and I want everyone to appreciate these next few days because we do have work to do, but certainly we are at the dawn of a new era. Thank you, Jesus.